Okay, everybody out there in YouTube land, welcome to the latest episode of Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. My name is Matt Yancic, and I am the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain. And tonight I have a special treat for you all. While he appears to be frozen, please don't be alarmed. This is what you see next to me is an image of my guest. Tonight I have comic book writer and artist, as well as role player, Bill Willingham, who got his start. I'm sure most people know him mostly for his comics, but there's, of course, a little going way back. He got his start at TSR in the late 70s and early 80s, and so he used to illustrate dozens of role-playing modules and covers for different D&D works. He also did a lot of work for the Fiend, Folio, and Gamma World, for those of you that go way back, and I believe for Top Secret as well. He went on to work on Jeff D. and Jack Herman's Villains and Vigilantes role-playing game. But that's just the start, because the thing that really got Bill his accolades was when he leapt to comics, where he worked on, or of course he created, elementals for Comico, and then he did some of his own stuff, Coventry for Fantagraphics, and he also did the adult series Ironwood for Eros Comix. But the big thing, the giant thing that he is probably best known for is his work for Fables, the series that he created. It's a Will Eisner Comic Industry Award-winning series, and I believe that I'm not sure, but I believe that some of the omnibuses were on the New York Times bestseller list, for which he's also written prose as well, prose versions. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. I apologize that you're just getting the static picture of me, but I don't actually show up on video.
Is that like a vampire thing?
It's an old family thing. Let's just say that.
Okay. Right.
But Fables is the big comic that I'm known for now, and it did land me on the bestseller list a couple of times.
That's impressive, actually. That's like super impressive, as a matter of
Yeah,
fact.
I guess so. It's hard. It's hard for me to. Well, let me put it this way. I think it was James Joyce that some fan wanted to shake his hand, and he was Finnegan's Wake, right? James Joyce.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says, "Please, sir, can I shake the hands that wrote Finnegan's Wake?" And he says, "No, because these hands have also done other things." And I've always admired. In my mind, I heard that anecdote and said, "Yeah, don't get too full of yourself." If James Joyce is going to be humble about things like that, then no way should I start getting impressed with myself.
Well, to be honest, that's the thing. I went back and sort of reread a lot of your stuff. Well, not a lot, because there is a lot. I read a portion of it. And the thing that stuck with me, and the thing that really interested me about your work, is that you have a very distinct style, at least as far as I'm concerned, from a storytelling standpoint. And when I say storytelling, I don't mean to say writing or drawing, because I feel like to me the combination is storytelling. You kind
It
of
is,
have,
or it should be.
yes, I agree. You have a kind of an irreverent you have a playful and irreverent style, and yet you often deal with like very serious issues. And I think that is something that kind of caught my attention, or has held my attention over the years in your work. Would you say that's kind of a fair assessment, or?
Maybe. I have to tell you, it's hard to look at one's own work with any kind of distance, perspective, what have you. So I mean, I'm just stumbling along through this. My idea of storytelling is try to tell a good story, uh, try not to screw it up too much. That's about it. Um, my equivalent of Spencer Tracy's what makes great acting is, learn your lines, hit your mark. That's it.
And so with that though in mind, what was it that maybe initially like sparked your interest in storytelling? Because another thing we should say and clarify here is that there are a million writers out there, there are a million artists out there, there are much fewer writers and artists. What sparked your interest in kind of like telling stories through pictures and words?
Well, I came from a large family and a large military family, and we were, as I began to really be self-aware, we were stationed in Germany. This was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where I was not old enough to realize that if something went wrong, all of Germany was doomed, and us with it. But anyway,
Yeah.
a pretty large family. Everyone assumed we were Catholic, and that was not the case. It was just that we couldn't afford to get a TV sent over from America there at the time. So, you read or what have you, and sure enough, big family. I had a lot of older sisters who, since we didn't have that much to do, I was always able to corral one of them into reading to me. And there were comics around. I have no idea where the comics ever came from then. I guess when I did my own service in the military, I realized that the PX stores, the Army bookstores, carried them. But I didn't realize it at the time. They just sort of appeared.
Yeah.
And the thing about a comic book is corralling a big sister to read to you. A comic book is a lower commitment thing. And of course, whoever the she at the moment was, made me do half the work by looking at the pictures and explaining what's going on and all that. So the love of comics was baked in real early before I could read. That coupled with when we got out of the military, when my dad retired, he retired at the end of the enlistment after the Cuban Missile Crisis, because I learned much later, it's just like, oh my goodness, we just barely escaped being, turned to ash. We're moving along. But we sailed back to America. And at one point, my mother gathered us all and said, here's the wonderful things you're going to see when we get back to the United States. We're coming through New York, and you're going to see all sorts of skyscrapers. That was something you'd mentioned. And it stuck with me because I was just about to turn 5 at the time, had no idea what a skyscraper was. The nearest I could figure out, and with a big family, everyone, getting only a percentage of the attention. I guess I grew up not asking a lot of questions. I grew up trying to figure it out myself. So I'm trying to figure out, well, what could a skyscraper be? And the nearest I could think of is some of the comics had Stumbo the Giant or whatever. It's like, skyscrapers, I'll bet, are giants. I don't know why I added this. With squeegees, and they scrape the clouds.
Makes sense.
Making rain. So I expected to see that, and I was pretty excited. And we came back on the USS Buckner. I was very disappointed. The Buckner did not have a swimming pool. When we went to Germany, I was 3 years old, and we went over on the Queen Mary. And when they were being used for troop transport, you got barracks or suites or what have you, depending on how big your family was. Ours was big. We got a palatial suite. We went to the ship's pool. It had a swimming pool every day. It was incredible luxury. So I expected that on the way back too. Not so much. It was a troop transport Navy ship. Anyway, we got to New York. We got our car. I washed it, winched down. We piled in. It was a old Chevy station wagon, and we started driving through New York. And my mother in the front seat, we're packed in like sardines. Mother in the front seat is like, okay, look for the skyscrapers. Here they are. Here they are. And then she went down the list of like, Peter, do you see the skyscrapers? Yes, Mom, I see it. Barbara, do you see the skyscrapers? Anyway, the whole list. Finally, she got to me. And I'm looking. Everyone's saying they see the skyscrapers. And I don't see them.
No idea.
So when she got to me, she said, Billy, do you see the skyscrapers? And I said, no, all these buildings are in the way. Brought the house down.
But I think, go ahead.
Got a big laugh. I had no idea why. Yeah. But for that moment, I was the center of attention in a pretty big crowd, and I wanted more of that. I think the spark of I want to tell tales really hit right then and there. It was like, okay, this is power. I mean, I had them all chuckling. They never did explain. I of course eventually figured it out, but they thought the precocious little craphead kid told a great joke.
Was joking.
Yeah.
But you had actually gotten their attention. It's interesting though the way that you say that, because in a way, if the idea of being the center of attention, to me, if you're writing something down, that essentially implies that, if this is not your grocery list, which could be important too, but if you're writing something down, if you're drawing something, that implies that you believe it's something that other people should be looking at. So, I mean, to me, like the idea of a writer or an artist, there's got to be some confidence there and some feeling that, hey, I've got stuff to say and other people should be looking at it and reading it.
Whether no matter your storytelling medium, a musician, movie actor, creator, stand-up comic, which I tried and was terrible at. No matter what it is, you have to have enough ego to jump on the stage. In the writer's case, it's a metaphorical stage. But you jump on the stage and you say, hey, listen to me give me your attention for as long as I want it.
Right.
And in return, I promise that I will not be wasting your time. And that's a big, big bite. That's a huge thing to ask of people. So you have to deliver the goods. In writing, there's that delay. I mean, you are commanding quite a bit of attention from all sorts of people, just not all in one arena at one time. But there's a responsibility that you have to, once you get their agreement that, okay, I'm going to give you some of my attention for a while, that you have to deliver the goods.
When was it then that, so you make that connection when I think you said you were 3 or 4 years old and first coming to New York? I get this image of you like as an immigrant, like with the boxer hat on and like the suitcases and stuff, but I think it's a slightly different time. Cuban.
Yeah, it was 62, so not quite.
A little later.
We weren't on the mushaloo ship with Vito Corleone.
Right. You weren't coming to Ellis Island.
Oddly enough, though, that ship was anchored where I was stationed in Germany, and I ate and drank aboard the mushaloo many, many times.
Oh,
and
no
got
way.
thrown off a few times because I kept trying to climb the rigging. But
anyway, yeah, that's another story. That's a role player with imprisoned face. How about at what point do you pick up a pencil and either start drawing, start writing stories, or start making your mark and recording and showing people?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have a memory of starting to draw. I remember a few milestones. I remember when we were in Newport Hills, a suburb of Seattle, that one of the neighbor kids, Bruce Given, was about the same age, also an artist. And we would talk comics. I mean, we would buy comics, talk them over, trade comics, and decided to draw our own at some point. I'm not entirely sure how old we were, but young. Um, and so we just did hand-drawn comics, typewriter paper, folded over. And he did Chameleon Man, and I did Mantis Man, and they were both, let's call, inspired by Spider-Man. And we would hand draw them, and then, since there was only one of each, this was even before photocopiers were available. Rather than just sell them and then be, missing these works, we opened a comics library. It's for 5 cents. You get to borrow it, read it, then you got to return it.
Your own comics.
Our own comics.
Oh,
and
cool.
We did quite a few of them. I mean, I did many Mantis Mans. I'm sure we were in competition with each other to do more. I also did this 2-man team called Leap, Creep, and One. Leap, Creep because he could leap, and One because he's super fast. He was always the first guy to get somewhere. But yeah, I just did a bunch of them, and my sister Barbara took over the rental and library duties as far as we needed to work. So she would get them out there, get our money, and she was a thuggish person, as many of my older sisters were, and
that's true.
So she also did collections when some of the neighbor kids were a little reluctant to return them.
Right. I like that. That's like that's a really good big sister.
Yeah.
Totally like an enforcer, basically. That's fantastic. So then, when did so this is your drawing and writing kind of in a combination. Was there a certain point where it kind of clicked and you're like, this is what I want to do? Or was it like a sort of roundabout way that you
I think I slid into it. I lucked into a few good teachers who encouraged it. In junior high, I think they just started calling it middle school then, but it was 7th grade. I had a English teacher, Mrs. Matthewson, and she assigned, in addition to whatever things we were doing, we had to do a journal every single day, a little bit of journal entry about what our day has been. And I started trying to do the first day's work, and it just bored the hell out of me because I was not leading an interesting life. So instead, I completely ripped off a story I just read in the school library recently, and talked about, but made it my own. How I came home and realized that my own dad had been replaced by a pod person, and did the journal of that, and then expanding that. I mean, she kept us going for a couple of weeks, which, of course, in a kid's age is far too long. I talked about my Uncle Bob that had to come over and be locked up in the basement every full moon because, of course, he was a werewolf, and my sister would disappear from time to time, and it turned out that she was sliding into another universe in which she was princess and the knights, fighting the evil tyrants and all of this. And I just kept, making it up as I go along, figured, one of these days she's going to read this, I'll be in trouble. But until then, I'm having some fun. And when the 2-week thing was over, she said, okay, you can stop doing your journal, except for Billy, who has to keep doing his because I need to know how it's going to turn out.
That's great.
So yeah, at that point, I thought, okay, I guess I can write a good story.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure just about every single thing in my journal, my true journal, was stolen from other sources. But that's part of the writing business, apparently, as well.
Yeah, sure. And imitation is a sincere form of flattery. And of course, I think we also get our training wheels, I would imagine. Like, being a teacher myself, I encourage my kids to to steal, because when they steal, they're sort of practicing, and that's a way of learning and absorbing. And it sounds like you
Yeah, certainly every artist starts by copying who he likes and all that, and eventually your own ability to view and draw comes out of that. I mean, something unique grows out of that.
So coming out of high school, then did you go to art school? You said that you were in the military? Did you go into?
We were a military family. My father, in most of my high school, started a janitorial service, which took off. So every night after school, my brother and I had to go out with one of the trucks and do the accounts. He was old school, a man gets up at the crack of dawn, works,
right,
comes home, falls asleep in front of the TV. That's what a man does. So
yeah.
He liked my drawing and sometimes would show it off to people, parties and such, but always with the caveat that, sooner or later you got to put away the silliness and do real work. So yeah, no art school, none of that. I just had to kind of figure it out on my own. In my junior year of high school, we moved to Eastern Washington because both my parents came from farm life and they wanted to get back to it. And suddenly the joy of farm life is great for anyone on the outside looking in.
Right.
From junior year of high school on, I have never worked so hard in my life.
Right.
Yeah, and following that, I mean, a couple of years of that, my brother got out as soon as he could, going into the military. That was the one thing, we always knew. Dad expected us. We were a military family. Mm-hmm. When it's your turn, son, you're gonna take your turn.
Right.
And he was generous in that you did not have to go into the Army, which was his military service, but you have to do one of them.
Something, one of the branches.
My brother was smart when he realized that Dad was just going to have us work the farm while he golfed. He made the mistake of winning a local tournament once, and the bug hit him, and it's like, we work, he golfed.
Right.
My brother got away by joining the Army. I should have struck first. I was a year behind him, but I was graduated then and gotten out to join the Army too, which is an acceptable way. I went to college for a couple of years, which was also sort of acceptable, but only if that means you're going to be an officer when you join up.
Yeah, we have.
I don't remember the question, but hopefully I answered.
There
was a delay.
It's a free-form conversation, Bill. Please don't even worry about it. I was just going to say that I was going to confirm what you were saying, because I didn't grow up on a farm, but I worked on a farm during my summers. And someone actually named Double Down, Drew, in the chat was just saying also they grew up, and it was good work, but it was hard work and not for him. So I can kind of understand that. This kind of leads me, though, so I did a little bit of digging around and all of that. Is it true you were playing role-playing games while you were guarding nuclear missiles? Is this true?
Yes. Oddly enough, the Willingham family was a very nuclear family. My mother, during the Second World War, worked on the Manhattan Project. To the day she died, she never would admit what she did.
Right.
But the Manhattan Project, as you will know, was spread out all over the U.S. And the Hanford Atomic Works, which is in Eastern Washington, was the place that provided all the fissionable material. So she did something with them during the Second World War. And we were just, when we moved to the farm, we were just down the way from the Hanford. If you ever heard of a scandal where it turned out that the Hanford plant, this is long after the war and all this, but it's still the major supplier of fissionable material for our bombs. Apparently, they were illegally just venting steam from them, and this was all irradiated steam. So there was a whole bunch of a big to-do about the downwinders of this, and anyone downwind of the plant was, potentially in trouble. And our farm we were downwinders. So, that gets our whole family involved. My mother helped build the nukes, and then we were downwinders. Then my dad, when the farm didn't quite work out, he went back into construction and ended up working on the Hannaford atomic plant. So we were very nuke. And then I went into the Army and guarded nukes. So it was very thematic. But
yeah, oh, please go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, well, the military police, that's what I went into. I figured, all right,
okay,
I have to do my duty. I have to do a term, or else. MP sounds good because it's like, similar to police work. And I was vaguely interested in police work, so let's give it a try. And I eventually got to do military police work, like, writing tickets and arresting bad guys. But the first year was guarding a nuke site where all the nukes that were in theater had to be regularly maintained. And so they were taken offline, brought to our site. All the people that knew how to do that would maintain and fix them and all this. And we guarded it. We guarded the site. That meant that there was a string of towers, all sorts of kids just out of high school, boring themselves silly, looking out and watching grass grow because it was very remote. Yeah. No one was ever going to come. They didn't let you do anything that got your attention off of the
guarding
site area, the wood line, everything. So you couldn't read books or anything like that while you're out there, but you could talk on the landline. We had radios for official communications, and we had these landlines just for chatting, which they encouraged because it kept us awake and looking out. Right. So I was the communications guy at the time. We would hook all the landlines together. Everyone out in the tower would play this 12-hour game of D&D, which I would run from the front room. But they couldn't bring dice out there because that would take your attention off. And so some of these gruff old sergeants in the front room had to roll dice for the guys. And at first they were contemptuous of it. Like, this is the silliest thing I ever heard. But we had the best records as far as people not being caught, sleeping in their tower, things like that. Eventually all these gruff sergeants started campaigning.
No kidding, with you?
Well, not in the game, but the guys out in the towers. Why are you letting, Sergeant Odin roll your dice? I roll more 20s than he does on day. And they would try and steal players from each other just for the dice rolling that they would have to do.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So yeah, we played D&D 12 hours a day for a year, every day. And then often, because there were other platoons that they'd actually gotten me started on this, the other platoons also ran their games from the front room. So all the books were communally owned. You just leave them for the next shift.
Right.
And then, but when we're off duty, we would get in someone's room and play too. And then we were building up to some big event. So it's like, well, this is going to be 3 days. We get days off every once in a while. This is going to be 3 days. We've rented the Frankenstein Castle, bring your sleeping bags, sea rations, whatever. And we're going to camp out at the Frankenstein Castle and play D&D for 3 days straight.
What do you mean by the Frankenstein Castle? You guys rented a castle?
Well, yeah, you could rent castles in Germany.
Oh, no.
The really restored ones. Oh my God, there are some that cost just a fortune to rent for private parties, for weddings, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
The Frankenstein Castle at the time, Halloween was not big in Germany. It took a while for Halloween to catch on. the Frankenstein Castle was interesting because of its history. It was basically picked up. You could see it from the either the Rhine or the Moselle River, where Mary Shelley and all those guys took a tour, and you could see it up on the hill.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that she just, okay, that's a cool name, I'll grab that.
Right.
Really had nothing to do with her characters other than that. But it was in ruins. It was one of the few castles that had not been restored in any way. So we were able to get, I mean, you rent that, it's like, why would you want to stay overnight there? There's nothing. A few towers, parts of walls. We were able to get it for a song. I don't remember. We pitched in and rented it and played D&D for 3 days and was left alone. Nowadays you can't. I mean, you can rent the Frankenstein Castle, but they discovered Halloween. They discovered that, Frankenstein is a big important name in Halloween, and now it's surrounded by hotels and bar and
Right.
To rent it. They've restored a lot of it, and you can't. I mean, the army guys today out there playing D&D cannot afford it. I'm like,
I would imagine maybe not. Now, 12 hours a day. So when your fellow soldiers looked at you, were you kind of like the automatic game master? Did they know that, okay, Willingham knows
well, I was brought in reluctantly. One day coming off the tower line, my friend Mike Sinner, who's the only guy I still really know and keep contact with from the Army, he said that there's this game, D&D. I heard about it in my last year in college. One of the dean of students, Royal Ewing, he gave me soaring lessons, glider flying lessons, in return for my giving him and his son fencing lessons. I was big into fencing in college. Not post-hole diggings, but the sword fighting.
Right. Right. Okay. Got it.
And he told me, it's like, and so we became friends. And he said, we're going to be playing D&D tonight at my house. You want to come? And I go, what the hell is that? And he described it horribly. Well, you make up a character and you go down in a dungeon, and the deeper you go, the harder it gets because you're attacked by monsters. I go, okay, that sounds great. I didn't go. I mean, I was struggling in college. We were not a rich family. The problem with owning a farm is that on paper, you're worth a lot of money because farms are expensive. As far as real cash on hand,
right.
you got. So anyway, I was expected to pay my way. I did not get loans and things like that. So I was working 3 jobs in addition to the schoolwork. 2 of those, which were full-time, 40 hours a week, and killing myself. So I was not going to take time out to play this weird game. So that's when I'd heard about it. And then I went into the Army after my 3rd year in college. And he said, Mike Sinner talks about it. And I go, that sounds familiar. And it sounds really stupid, but sure, I'll hang out with you in the room and see what this is. And that first night I was hooked. I mean, the whole rolling up characters, I didn't quite understand it and all this kind of stuff. But then Doc Beck, Ed Beck was his name. He ran the game, and we were down in some dungeons, ran into a bunch of kobolds, barely made it out alive, all first level characters. And I said, that was just the most magnificent thing ever. And I was hooked.
Did you make a switch to DMing after that, or
I think we slid into it. At first it was Doc Beck, but Mike and Beck were in different platoons, so my timing was such that I could not often play the way they could because it was on their schedule. Each platoon had a different shift. So I think I just, to get more playing, started running again. And after a while, it became the triumvirate. Mike or I or Doc Beck would run the game, and we had a shared world, and we would just switch over DMing. And we never worried about, well, you can't have your character over here because he's already stuck in this thing. It was just like, nah.
Yeah, just hand waved it.
Right. But
So
yeah,
then,
the three of us for a year ran uh, the show, and then I transferred out um, because I wanted white hat duty, which is like police duty, and so I went to Bremerhaven up at the north end of Germany, and started up a game there because I wasn't gonna give it up.
so are you still at that point drawing and making up and storytelling, making up, or has this kind of like hijacked your drawing and maybe your writing, and you're just doing the D&D stuff?
Oddly enough, I didn't get to do a lot of drawing, a little bit in college, but in basic training, um, we had some free time, and I started drawing because every single person in the barracks, I drew something for someone, and it caught on, and every single person in the barracks wanted a picture of him in his Class A uniform with the full MP bazaar, because we were, someday we're going to be real MPs, standing there holding a smoking 45 like you just shot someone.
Right.
And a guy gave me like, $10 to do that. And then suddenly everyone wanted it. And then it was like 20 or 30. The prices went up because I couldn't do as much. But I spent the entire time in basic training drawing these pictures of guys with smoking 45s. And when I tried to vary it up, people would complain, like, no, come on, you gave him he just shot someone. Like, you got to do the same for me.
Right. You couldn't.
Well, it's just, I made a ton of money in basics doing that. And so when I got to Germany, I sort of continued to do that kind of stuff. I stopped drawing a bit when I found a more lucrative avenue for extra pay. We had a small Stars and Stripes bookstore. That's the PX System bookstore.
Yeah, yeah.
We had a very small base. So the Stars and Stripes bookstore was this little cubby hole. It had one person in it who, as you may know, when you're in the military, they hire like wives and husbands or whatever to do the kind of maintenance, run the stores and stuff like that. So the woman who ran the Stars and Stripes bookstore was gorgeous, was just walked off the cover of Vogue or something. She was just incredible. As a result, every single MP, and this was the 164th MP company, and there was almost 200 of us. Every one of the guys was embarrassed to go buy their porno mags from the Stars and Stripes because they had Playboy and Wii and maybe, I don't know. I think there was a cutoff on you couldn't get too overt in the Stars and Stripes, but it had all that stuff. But they would not look this woman in the eye,
right,
and buy wank magazines. So I made a deal. It's like, look, I'll pick it up. Whatever your magazine costs, you pay me the cover price again, and I'll get it for you. And as a result, at least once a week, I was going in buying a stack. I almost wish we had the video now.
A stack of.
You're about right. Sometimes it was a little bigger. Multiple copies of Penthouse and Playboy and whatever. And I just plop it down in front of her. She never asked. I was waiting.
Like, what are you doing with 20 copies of the same magazine?
But if you're not going to ask, I'm just going to let your imagination, like, why do I need these?
Right.
And,
well, I think, to be honest, if somebody went in and bought like a stack of 20 or 30, I'm thinking the opposite of using it as pornography. I'm thinking like there's some sort of project going on or somebody's using it for something completely unrelated, because it just doesn't make any sense to buy 15, unless you have a business, not unlike yours, which it had never occurred to me that would be possible, but
it was, I got to tell you, the money rolled in.
Yeah. Okay.
These guys, I mean, there were some real monkey thugs in the MPs at that time. They'd throw themselves into bar fights without a hesitation, but they would not face that very petite woman.
Right. Too embarrassing. Too
Right.
embarrassing. So then, at what point? Now, are you thinking when you come out of the military, you're going to go into art? You're going to draw? You're going to write? You're going to storytell? Was there some sort of plan here, or
my plan was either police work, which every MP, that's what they wanted. They wanted to get out of the military, get a police job, and a lot of them did. I probably know a lot of cops sprinkled up. Anyway, but it was either that or I was going to go try and draw comics. At the time, I did not know that there were people who wrote and drew their own comics. I knew that there were writers and there were artists. I had to pick one. I figured, well, I started drawing before I started trying to write, so I guess I'm going to draw. By the time I got out of the Army, I tried sending samples in several times to Marvel and DC. I was not ready. Got very kind rejection letters. But by then I'd found the ad for an artist at TSR. And I said, I can do that until I'm ready to draw comics. And the quality of art is not stellar at TSR at the time. So maybe I could squeeze by.
And did you just send in a portfolio to them and they just...
Yeah, I sent in a portfolio. The guy, Dave Sutherland, the art director, wrote back right away. Very quick.
Oh, wow.
Turnaround, considering it had to go and come from Germany.
Yeah.
And he said, I think your penciling is very good. Your inking is not as good, but that will come in time. And basically, he offered me the openness. I answered an ad in Dragon magazine. He said that position was filled because you got an old magazine. Right. But there's a new one coming up. So he tentatively offered it to me based on, let's have another conversation and do up some more samples. And I said, well, I'm almost out of the Army. It's going to be easier to have that second conversation in person.
Right.
Because I'm leaving. And I just showed up in Lake Geneva where TSR was and called up and said, let's have that second conversation.
Right. And then you show him your portfolio and he kind of makes recommendations. Is that correct?
No.
Oh, no.
He asked to see my portfolio. I stupidly sent it. When you leave, the Army will free, all your stuff and send it home with you, including a car if you got it. I didn't. But what I forgot or should have realized was that's slow boat stuff.
Oh, right.
Your stuff will eventually catch up to you. So I showed up and he said, let's see your portfolio. I go, yeah, there's a little problem there. It will be here someday.
Right.
Because I did send it to myself, care of TSR. I was a little ahead of myself there. And he goes, well, it's between you and one other guy, and I have to decide in a week. So here's a bunch of paper. Here's some pens. Here's some pencils. Here's a lat board. Go back to your hotel room. Come back in 5 days and he just made a list of draw this.
Right.
And I just left myself silly for 5 days. Came in, and it was me against the other guy.
Yeah.
Who was not happy that they chose me rather than the other guy.
So then you made out with that, but did the other? I mean, I don't know. Did the other guy go on to do other things, or did he just kind of disappear and you're not really?
He kind of did. I followed him for a while because I thought he was going to hunt me down and kill me. He was really, really upset that I got the job and he did. Right. Dave Sutherland, and something that I thought was questionable as a thing to do, he brought us both together in front of the entire art department and awarded the job almost like it was a game show. And the winner is you. And he pointed to me, and I go, oh, great. So the other guy...
In front of the other guy?
Right in front of him, which I thought was in bad form.
Yeah.
He started to kind of tear up. he asked to see my samples, and
Oh,
Dave
that's so
Sutherland
sad.
just handed my samples over to him, and he ripped through them with this look of growing anger on his face, and saying, "I'm better than this. I'm better than this. Look at this." And it's probably true. He was slicker. His inking style and all that was more refined, but the underdrawing, the anatomy and all that kind of stuff was not as good. And I think that's why they chose me over him. And anyway, so because I thought he was going to come and kill me at some point, I kept a remote eye on him.
Right.
Then I can't remember his name now, and he did some stuff in some of the other gaming magazines.
Well, that's good. That's good that he went on to do stuff as
different worlds and things like
yeah.
that.
That's great.
Anyway,
So what do they do? Do they like you show up every day at 9 o'clock with a briefcase and you start doing your drawing, or how is it working to be?
It was very much like that. It was you punched in. Remember time clocks? It was the first time I was ever on
into wow, that's amazing.
It was both laissez-faire and really strict in a weird combination of ways. Laissez-faire in the where you can show up when you want and you can punch out when you want, as long as you give us 40 hours of work in a week. So some of us were getting in at 11 and 12.
Right.
And finally they said, okay, not quite so laissez-faire, by 10, get here by 10. But yeah, you punch in, you punch out for your lunch, you get 30 minutes for lunch, and you just work on the clock. I had, they would fill up art room offices as artists arrived. So Dave Sutherland was at one end of the hallway in his little office. Then there was a art room shared by Jim Rosloff and Errol Lotus. Then there was the next one in line shared by Jeff D. and Dave LaForce. And then there was me, and the next artist they hired would share a room with me. But for a while I had my own thing. Mine was right at the stairs where the cute girl would come from the other office across town to pick up the mail every day. So I did, at first I was supposed to be working. I did a lot of sleeping because I had the night shift in Germany and I couldn't get used to it. So I'm sleeping at my desk. Plus it's such an old office, you could hear plenty of warning that someone was coming. So I was always awake and working by the time someone got to my, but I would sleep and I would flirt with that girl who eventually married some idiot. But anyway, and occasionally
at
draw.
TSR or another.
What?
At TSR or another?
Yeah, I think they were both still at TSR at the time.
No kidding. Okay.
I saw them. They showed up at a convention to announce engagement. And I said, "Oh, that's too bad. I always had a thing for you." Well, you should have spoken up because I thought you were cute. But water under the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I would show up. He'd assign things. Part of my interview, he asked me all sorts of stuff. Did I know how to do this? And did I know how to do this? And I had learned long ago to answer yes. Could I do 4-color work? You bet.
Right.
Did not know what that meant. Key lining. To this day, I don't think I still know what key lining is, but I sure knew how to do it.
Yeah, I think we all kind of learn that at a young age. It's just if they ask you if you can do it in the interview, oh yeah, of course, I do that all the time.
Yep. So I got a reputation early on as like a go-getter. Mm-hmm. I never got caught sleeping, but I'd always be the very last to leave to punch out. Right. The reason being that after everyone was gone, I would break into Dave Sutherland's office. He had a really bad lock on it to try and figure out what these things are that I was supposed to know how to do. Oh. And I sort of vaguely got an idea about key lining and there was some other stuff. But I couldn't figure out 4-color work until I saw these module and game thing covers pinned up on the corkboard on his wall.
Yeah.
And they were just full color work.
Right.
So I can't, but he had a sign that said 4-color. I go, okay, these are 4-color, but which is stupid because I could see many, many more colors than 4 colors in every one of these. And it wasn't until I took them off the wall and opened up the separations, they were separation films, that I realized that the full color was broken down into 4 plates, the yellow,
Right.
the blue,
Yeah.
and I go, oh, 4 color, got it. Why didn't he just say that? So yeah, it's paint. I can do paintings. But yeah, I would break in a lot just to figure out all the stuff, because I thought I was going to be fired any day. Every day someone better than me could have showed up and they said, you're a better artist. Get rid of that guy.
So you didn't feel like does this mean you didn't feel like you felt like you were ready to be there or belong there, or?
I did not feel like I belonged there because my skill was not up to. It's like I'm a door away from Jeff D, and I just thought he was the catch pajamas. I mean,
right.
And they all could do better in various ways than me.
Were you still sending to Marvel and DC, or?
Well, not yet.
Kind of stopped.
About mid-year at TSR, I started putting samples together again. Mm-hmm. But the culture shock of when I was in the Army, this was at a age 77 to 80. Mm-hmm. We were not getting the brightest and best generally. And the number of people that had any college were just few and far between. So while I was in the Army, anywhere I was stationed, I was the smartest man in the universe by comparison. When I mentioned running the game from the front room at the nuke site.
Yeah.
I was a private, and that job I was doing, running the communications, was E6 or above minimum, and yet they couldn't find any of those that could pass the test, because in addition to running the communications between the towers, it was one of 2 people that actually held the keys to the nuke bunkers. It took 2 different keys, and just like you saw in the movies, they have to be spread out, so no one can.
So you can't reach like both. It's no one person.
As a matter of fact, no one was ever allowed to hold both keys to any one bunker.
Just physically pick them up. You could never.
Someone tries to pick up both keys, and the guards in the front room were supposed to gun them right down. I mean, it was no nonsense. Right. So the guy that handed out the badges at the front gate was one of the key guys, and then me, well separated, was the other key guy, and we each had our own combinations to the safe that held the 2 keys, or sets of keys, because there was a dozen different bunkers. Anyway, it was a big, important job, and no one, not even the officers, were able to pass that stupid front room test to be able to hold the keys. All the sergeants had to have other supervisory roles because they couldn't pass it. They could never be allowed to have control of the keys, which was kind of cool, except if the balloon went up, because maybe the nukes that are actually deployed would be fired, but the ones that were offline for assembly and maintenance, we had to blow them up before the Ruskies got there.
Got in.
And everyone, and many times we practiced setting the demolitions all over the bunkers. But the 2 people that couldn't leave because you couldn't abandon the keys were the 2 key guys, which we had to stay and get blown up with the thing.
Oh,
other than that, it was a fine, cushy job.
Yeah, right. Other than having to take the bullet, take the bomb for the. Well, thank you for your service, sir. Thank you.
But anyway. So I was a super genius in the Army. I felt it. I was an arrogant little craphead.
Yeah.
I almost said a very bad word. But
you can say a bad.
When I got out and was suddenly in this environment where most of the people working there on the creative side of TSR had gone to college and graduated, which I had not, I felt by comparison so stupid, because suddenly I'm amongst people that can compete with me. So my confidence was about as low as can be, which is probably why I never asked the cute girl out. But yeah, I thought I was going to be fired at any moment. They were going to catch on to me that I didn't know how to draw. I didn't know how to do all the stuff I'd
Right.
sworn I knew how to do, and I was kind of dumb. So
It's so, but you know what I think? Like the teacher in me is listening to what you're saying. And here's what the teacher in me thinks. Very often, the students that are hardest on themselves are actually quite skilled. And they have a real confidence problem, and that's because they are very aware of like what quality is in whether it be writing, whether it be a film, whether it be a drawing, whatever it is. And they're comparing themselves to like the very greatest. So in this case, it sounds like you're comparing yourself to Jeff D. And so to me, the mark of like someone that has like a really good taste or is probably eventually going to make it is somebody that is highly critical of themselves and lacks confidence. But what's interesting here is that you're still sending your stuff to Marvel and DC, so you must have had at least an inkling of confidence or a surety about yourself to be doing that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sending
I had
stuff.
some. I certainly had the ambition. I knew that TSR was not where I ended up. It's got to be comics.
Mm-hmm.
I dismissed by then any thought of going into law enforcement because, like so many, I was surrounded by people who, there were grown kids playing cops and robbers, not quite. And I was very much the same. I don't think that was the right attitude to bring towards an important job like that.
Right, right.
So comics are bust. So yeah, about halfway through my year, I started putting comic pages together and sending them off. I was going to send them off to Marvel and DC, but I sent them off to Marvel first. I wanted to do Marvel comics more than DC. And John Romita Sr., who was the art director at the time. Now art directors everywhere else is like the main guy who decides who does, the art. For the comics, the editors decide that. The art director does the production art.
Okay.
Making sure the lettering is all up to snuff, all that kind of stuff. The nuts and bolts of getting something ready for print. Mm-hmm. I did not realize this, but he was John Romita Sr. He was the guy who saved Spider-Man after Ditko. It's like, Ditko leaves Spider-Man. Who could possibly do as well?
Follow up. Yeah.
And John Romita followed and did fine. So
and his son later did very well after.
And his son too. So he was this, I assume, art director, that's the guy. Well, he got on the phone to me like the day after he got my samples and went point by point by point, everything that was wrong. Spent an hour on the phone with me. Which was incredibly generous because he said, I can't really assign work, but here's where you're weak, here's where you're strong, here's in this panel, you should have done this and this and this. And I wrote all of it down. I remembered it all. Did a full day's work at work and then would go home at night and redo my comic samples. I did all the pages I'd done, but affected all the changes that he called for. And I sent him back, turned him around in a week's time. And he called back and said, no one has ever done that before. No one's ever gotten that much of a critique, fixed the problems, and sent him right back. So he was quite impressed with me, but then proceeded to spend another hour on the phone. Now here's what's wrong with these. We went back and forth. And finally, when I left TSR, I went to go show my stuff to the actual editors. But yeah, as Dave Sutherland mentioned at one point, is like, you arrived here with one foot out the door. Everyone in the art department knew you were going to go do comics at some point.
So you kind of, that kind of.
I didn't hide it.
Right.
That I wanted to. Yeah.
But I think, how then did you end up, what was your first comics assignment? So how long were you at TSR? And then how long was it before you got your first comics assignment? Or broke into comics?
Well, it depends on whether or not you, because I did, as you may well know, the D&D ads in the back of Marvel Comics.
Yes.
Do you count those as real comics work? At the time, I didn't. Looking back, I think they count. but I was doing those. I started doing those while I was at TSR, and then when I quit, I continued to do those for a year on a freelance basis. And actually made much more. The ad department paid freelancers much better than the art department paid the salary guys. So I made out quite well. So for the year after TSR, I did those ads, and I used that time. Lived in Stony Brook, Long Island. Used that time to try and get into Marvel and or DC. When I could, I jumped on the train with new samples, went out to the offices. This was back in the day when you could just show up,
right,
hang out in the lobby, and someone would come and look at your stuff.
Right, right.
I got some encouraging stuff from them, but no work. And looking back, I think I was not quite ready. But at the same time, some of the editors would say, there are other comic companies. You should get a little something under your belt, and then you'll be ready to work for us, which I did. I went to the Forbidden Planet comic shop in New York, bought every independent comic I could get.
Right, yeah.
And Nexus had just started with Capital, and
that's right.
Pacific Comics had started. First Comics may have just announced their eventual existence, but and also there was Noble Comics, the guy doing the Justice Machine. Well, anyway, I went back to my house and said, I'm not going to, for Marvel and DC, I would do Marvel sample pages and DC sample pages, but I wasn't going to do new samples for every single one of these.
Right.
So I thought to myself, let's do some generic comic pages to show that I can draw and send those to every one of these, which I did. And I created the group, the Elementals, strictly to show elemental based superheroes. They'll see that I can draw. I sent the samples out. Mike Gustovich at Noble Comics called 2 days later. So basically he must have gotten to the post office, opened them, and picked up the phone to me. Said, come and draw for us. So I got on a bus, moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, to draw Noble Comics. And I said, well, what am I going to be doing? Like, which book? He was doing a couple of books. The Justice Machine. He just started something called Cobalt Blue.
Right.
And some other, what book am I going to be working on? And he got this confused look on his face and said, well, the book you pitched us.
Oh, he thought...
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't think they were sample pages. He thought you were saying,
it never
hey,
occurred to me that I was doing a pitch.
Right.
And I go, the book I pitched. He goes, yeah, the Elementals. This looks great. Get started. I go, yeah, well, that's of course what I meant. What I meant is I'm pretty quick. What am I going to draw in addition to, of course, the book I pitched you?
Right, of course, because,
yes.
When someone of course that's what you're here for. I can do that.
That's how I started. I did not intend the Elementals to become a comic book, but it had to be one. So I needed a villain group, so I grabbed the villains that I'd done for the V&V.
That's
and
right.
We were off to the races.
So then you sort of the Destroyers came out of Villains and Vigilantes, and so the Destroyers actually came first when you were doing that work for them. But had you ever thought about attaching the Elementals to that, or was it just a coincidence? You're like, oh well, I already have these bad guys, so I guess I'll just use them.
Well, he picked me up from the bus station. We went for a walk. And then I was gonna be in their guest room until I got an apartment. Mm-hmm. But he expected me to head back because he had a pretty good studio set up and he had a big rambling house. He expected me to get back and start, page 1, panel 1 that day. Oh. So I'm vamping at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I didn't have a story to go with them, but of course I didn't tell Mike that. So it's like, okay, I need people for these guys to fight. Well, I got a supervillain team. I guess I'll use them. That's it. But
that totally shocks me. It I mean, your story is mildly shocking, but the idea here that you're just sort of making this story up off the cuff, because
Yeah.
I don't know, remember if I said this before the interview or if I said this early on in this interview, but the truth is, for those of you that don't know, my first Bill Willingham comic was Elementals #5, and I remember I bought it in the store or at a shop. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's sex, violence, and swearing in this, and I want to check this out. And I read it, and I was very excited by it. I thought it was a cool story. But as I've, gone through life, there are some comics you kind of set aside, and you're like, oh, I have like a nostalgic love for that, but it's not really very good. Elementals, to me, I read it now, and it still holds up. And the themes that you cover in it, the stories, I mean, are you kind of saying that's just sort of accidentally came out like that? You just sort of
It started out accidentally. Of course, immediately you start trying to find the structure to whatever you're trying to say. I mean, early on, and you'll see in the first Elementals that there's barely enough story to get the two in a room to fight. By issue 2, by that time, Noble Comics had gone under. A Texas Comics in Houston had gotten the rights to all this stuff. So I was down in Houston going to do the Elementals for them.
Yeah.
Turns out they'd never had any real money, so they went under. And I'd gone to Philly with Comico, who actually had money. By that third time, I was finally smart enough to find out who the money guy is in the company and go talk to him before anyone else and see, are you guys really financially sound? They were.
Right.
But the Justice Machine annual that had the intro to the Elementals came out from Texas Comics, and then they went broke putting that out. And that was just a quick back of the book introduction. Then the first issue, basically I drew it, and they had a guy, Mike, what was his name?
Mike
they had
Leake.
him under contract. No, not Mike Leake yet. It was writer, Mike Wolf. Anyway, they had him contracted. He gets to write the entire line. So they told me, yeah, you draw it and tell us what the story is, but he's the writer. And it was literally, so I'm drawing the first issue of the series for Texas Comics. Every page is coming in. Okay, what does this character say in this panel? What is it? And you get to be paid as the writer for me telling you.
Right.
So I was very not happy with that situation. And when just about the final page of the first issue is drawn, where the guys come in and say, yeah, we're broke. We can't afford to do this. So here's all your artwork back. And you can take it somewhere else. I met the Comico guys by then. So I went to go talk to them. But the first thing I said on my, I got on a plane to go to Philadelphia to talk with these guys. First thing I said to Mike was, you're fired. Just like, that was, you were imposed on. It was a nice guy too.
Yeah.
But you were imposed on me, and I'm never going to walk into that situation again.
Yeah. I mean, that just seems kind of ridiculous to me.
It was
so
totally...
you literally got on a plane. You know what's really funny? My first comic book pilgrimage was to Comico on DeKalb Street.
Yeah.
In Norristown, Pennsylvania. I have a photograph of myself in like cargo pants and standing in front of Comico. It was weird because like my father drove me there, and so he's like, "Okay, Matt, we can go there and we're gonna show him your scripts and we'll show him your art, and I'm sure they'll be really nice." And it was closed. And so it was this little. What was funny is I was expecting this big skyrise, like I'd heard Marvel,
Right, because
DC,
all publishing companies are in big skyrise.
it was, yes, and I was probably expecting a giant with a squeegee scraping the atmosphere with it. But I got up to it, and it's just this little like house. It was this little house,
a ramshackle house.
yeah,
Yes.
like a house with a wooden sign that was not even hung up. It was leaning against the building. And I have a photograph of myself that's faded, standing there in cargo pants, that my father took of me. And I guess that's the place that you went. And,
Yes.
and I did a pilgrimage there based on, because at that time they were publishing Grendel from Matt Wagner, the Robotech line, like 3 different books, and then of course your Elementals. I think it was all around the same. It kind of blurs together, but those are.
Yeah.
I went out there for that. Like I was just so excited
Oh, that's great.
to be there. So it's funny that you would fly out there.
Yeah. It was a split house, split into 2 things. The Comico offices, and Dennis Lasorda was a physical therapist, and that was his practice area. And Phil Lasorda from Comico was his brother. Joey Lasorda was his receptionist. It was very much an Italian Guido. We're all stuck together family.
Right.
We look out for each other.
Right.
I loved him. Dennis had such a successful practice that he was looking to hire a doctor, because he would do the physical therapy for the local hospital and stuff like that, and referrals. But it's like, it'd be better if I opened a full clinic so that all the physical therapy referrals could come straight from them to me. And he was quite an entrepreneur. One day he picks me up. We're going to go to lunch and talk over something or other. And I get in his car and I have to move this package. He goes, "Hey, tell me what you think about that. Is it any good?" I go, "Any good?" And I turn it over, and it's a Rembrandt sketch, pen and ink sketch. And I go, "This is a Rembrandt." He goes, "Yeah. Is it well drawn?" I can't tell. I picked it up at an auction because it seemed like a good investment. I go,
An actual Rembrandt?
I almost had my ass on a Rembrandt.
Wait, an actual Rembrandt or a print?
An actual Rembrandt, not a paint. One of his paintings, one of his pen and ink preliminary things.
Wow,
that was that guy. That was he. Just so
I can't imagine there was a Rembrandt in Norristown.
They were not going to run out of money, Comico, but they made a few bad business decisions. But they were a good first company to go with. They did not impose a lot of stuff like, "Oh, we gotta give our friend the writer a little something, and then you gotta," very much it was, get the books in, we'll pay you. They never failed to pay, and let us know what you're gonna do. I think it was that the freedom that made me start exploring, okay, what kind of comics do I want to tell? And so I started drawing issue 2 for them. And that's when I think you'll notice the not subversive ideas. I hope they weren't, but instead what do I think about this medium I love, and what kind of stories would I like to tell?
Well, there's definitely that. So there's a couple things that I was going to say, at least as far as my experience with Elementals goes. So there's a couple of things that stand out to me about it. One was the meta aspects of it, because at certain points along the line, the characters start saying things like, "Okay, guys, we're acting like comic book characters right now. We have to kind of rethink this." The other thing that struck me about it, and it was something that caused me to hide the comics from my parents, even though they were totally supportive of me, but there was always a little bit of nervousness. But they were always they trusted me. They were readers themselves, and they loved that stuff. And my dad, like I said, my dad took me out to Comico. But like the real life aspects, like the Jerry Falwell televangelist character and stuff like that. It made me wonder when I look back on it. I'm like, wow, this is some pretty deep stuff. Which I look back now on and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Like he's rethinking like what's going on in comics and what they can be and the stories they can tell. Were you aware that you were doing this, or did you make a choice and say, I'm going to do this, or was this just seem like the natural way to go with the elementals?
It was a combination. It seemed the natural way to go, but in one of the early issues, I think it was issue 3, the colorist that was doing the book then, named Janet Jackson, no relation.
I remember the name. Yeah.
She was working in our studio, but also doing some work up at Marvel. She would actually commute.
Yeah.
So one day we're in New York and picking up Janet from the Marvel offices to go out to dinner or something like that. And so she was showing her latest pages, which were from issue 3, I think, to the Marvel people. And they were looking at it. And there was this one panel where I wanted it to be that you could barely see the helicopters, the gunships coming out of the...
I remember because they were invading the island and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was olive drab colored helicopters against dark gray skies. And back then, the color requirements at Marvel is like you put dark against bright, you put bright against dark so that everything pops. So everyone was kind of fascinated by this one panel. They're looking at it going, God, it's so cool, because you're looking at the foreground and then you notice that the helicopters are coming. And they were admiring it, that it had an interesting effect. And then as like you could almost feel the robot clicking, then they turned to me and said, this is wrong. You should have fixed this.
So they kind of overrode like their initial, like they first love it, and then they're suddenly like, wait, we got to think about the company program here.
Yes.
No. And
it was like the scales falling off of my eyes right then. It's like, oh, Marvel isn't this bastion of geniuses, and I'm just a stupid kid trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Right.
Instead, they know that this is a good thing, and yet it couldn't penetrate.
It couldn't register. Yeah.
And it freed me up to start thinking, like right then, it's like, okay, don't try and make a Marvel comic out of this. Don't try and figure out the best story and the way you would tell it. And I think that's kind of what unlocked it. I don't think that was their intention, but it worked out that way.
Right. I mean, it sounds like suddenly, something clicks in your head.
Yeah.
And you feel like you can be you. And you can, I mean, it sounds to me kind of like maybe that confidence that you were talking about maybe lacking in the beginning. Suddenly you have a realization, a moment of self-reflection, and also like a moment of kind of realizing. It's kind of like when you become an adult, or at least for me, like I grew up and I'm like, wait a minute, adults aren't the super smart people that I thought they were. They screw up all the time. But it sounds like you kind of realized this. And so then with Elementals, I know that after Elementals kind of eventually, it kind of unfortunately had some troubles and now is in legal issues, and which are just horrible when I think about it. So after that, you did go on to you went on to Fables. But there's a lot of other stuff like in the between where you're like, you hop to DC and you're doing work for them. Can you talk a little bit about like coming to an end with Elementals and then sort of moving on to DC and then Fables? And
well, the problem with Comico and me and the Elementals is that they were people trying to learn how to be businessmen in the publishing field, and they didn't know what they were doing to start. They were figuring it out as they go along. I was trying to learn how to become a professional storyteller. I did not know what I was doing, but I was figuring it out as I went along. there was a little too much lack of expertise there, and I think it caught up to us. Some of our relationships were pretty tense by the time. They were making a lot of decisions that the worst thing that can happen to a small company is to have a few successes and they think, we've made it, we're big, we can make big moves now. They made a lot of big moves, including doing newsstand distribution, which was dead by that time. And it was
That's right. I remember that.
It was a hotbed of graft and shenanigans. And so they lost a fortune doing that, to the point where at the point they were like 200,000 in debt. And this was back in still the 80s when that meant something. They decided to pack it in. Dennis, who could have bailed them out, but kind of had the idea of, I've thrown money into this hole for too long. It's time for me to get out. Then they went looking for a way to get out, without just shutting down. And they found Comico was a partnership with Phil Lasorda, Dennis Lasorda, Bill Cucinato, and Jerry Giovinco. Matt Wagner was one of the partners at one point, but then decided he wasn't going to be a publisher. He wanted to just draw and write comics. So those four of the partners said, we got to go find a fifth partner that has some money. They found one in Andrew Rev, who was a crook, an idiot, and possibly insane. And I think in this business, you can be two of the three and still scrape by. You can't be all three. He bailed them out in a way that they presented him to us that he was a fifth partner and he's going to cash influx the company. But he was the money guy to deal with. The one thing I learned by then is don't deal with, editors and art director, deal with the money guy. So I dealt with him and said, okay, so you're going to save Comico. Great. Glad to see it. I'm done. I've got work at DC now and things like that. And there's just too many bad decisions being made here. But by then I'd had many other ideas for books. I go, look, I'm not going to abandon a sinking ship. It's like if Comico wants to buy Elementals, then that way I'm out the door, but you get to continue doing it. We made it. After the fact, I found out that he was not a partner, that he was actually buying them out for pennies on the dollar, and that I did not sell Elementals to Comico. I sold them to him.
Right. Now
he's the guy that's got them. And he is just a terrible, terrible person. I should have, Matt went the other way. It took him probably a decade to wrest Grendel from the claws of this creepo. But he did it. He persevered. And I think in the long run, that was the way to go.
Yeah.
Matt was getting more outside work than me at the time. I could not afford to fight the guy for 10 years.
Right. Right.
So I made the easy decision. Anyway, he's got the Elementals. I will never have it again. When he went under trying to publish them, every once in a while I'd call him up and offer him $1 for the rights back as a joke. I stopped doing that when I realized that he was always going to use that as an opportunity to snake me back into his realm.
Yeah.
The Elementals ended up there, and that left me without much to do. I had some work at DC, not much. I did some covers for a friend at this new Eros Comix thing, and then they
remember Eros.
Why don't you do a book for us? And it turns out they were Fantagraphics, so I did end up doing Coventry with them.
Yep.
That was going to be fine, and I was going to barely be able to make. They were small and not well. Their cash flow was not great. But I could make enough to scrape by, except the distributor wars happened at that time. Capital Comics distribution went under, owing them so much money. Anyway, the checks dried up and I couldn't afford to keep Coventry going.
Right. Yeah, because it folded after 3 issues or 4?
Yeah, I had the 4th started when they came to me and said, payments is going to come a little later than usual. And the payment then was, if I finish an issue in enough time, I can afford to eat long enough to get the next issue done. I mean, it was strictly that tight. So I couldn't afford a delay. So I had to give up Coventry, which was unfortunate. I thought it was, there was something there. I think you'll find that a lot of the Coventry DNA ended up in Fables eventually.
Well, I was going to say, I think, I sort of feel like Fables, to me, is in a way, it had summed up just about, it sort of touched upon and summed up just about everything you had sort of done up until that point, and maybe it put it together into new and different ways that sort of like, I mean, obviously, everybody knows Fables was a critical success, and I mean, to me, it's a masterpiece. The fact that you went for how many issues on it?
150.
150. I was going to say 150, but I wasn't sure. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just an incredible work where I feel like, again, there's that sense of whimsy, and yet at the same time, you're balancing in there some very serious kind of topics and serious aspects. Was that one of the ideas that was sort of circling around in your head when Comico kind of folded and you lost Elementals?
It was, I think, Fables and Coventry and Elementals and things like that. I found myself constantly finding excuses to put mythological and fairy tale elements in books where they didn't really quite belong. So it was, in many ways, I was living in Vermont at the time, getting some work from DC. I would, I did a bunch of Sandman spin-offs things, and that kept the wolf from the door. But I decided, look, it's time to create something of my own again. And this time, figure out what it is I like and what I don't like in comics. So I just made lists to myself. Oh, I like mythology. I like fairy tales. I like this, da, 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 da. I like secret cities. I like, people living off the grid. Did all of that, decided this was not something that I was getting work through Vertigo then. At the time, Vertigo they're producing some good stuff, but it was very much, rebellious, pouty-lipped teenagers with lots of piercings, and that was just not my cup of tea.
Right.
So I wasn't going to offer it to them, but I was going to continue doing work with Shelley Bond at Vertigo, while I was putting this other thing together. And at one point, I was on the phone with her about something else, and I apparently said, it was Friday, and I said, look, I got to cut this short. We would chat the hours away. I got to cut this short. I have a proposal I need to finish up and send out by Monday. She was very territorial. She goes, what proposal? And I said, it's nothing Vertigo would ever be interested in. It's fairy tales and, no piercings, none of that. No kids on scooters. Well, she made me tell her the thing. And at the end of it, she listened quietly and if you ever met Shelley Bond, listening quietly is hardly in her wheelhouse. Very respectfully, she listened until I finished explaining what it's going to be. And then I said, and as you can see, it's not a Vertigo book. And she said, oh, no, it is a Vertigo book. You're going to send me the proposal on Monday, and we're going to accept it, and I'll have your assurance of that within a week. Okay, sure, Shelley. So I did it. And sure enough, in a week,
Yeah.
they accepted it. Jeanette Kahn, who
Yeah.
ran DC at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
she had a foot out the door. She was on her way out to go to Hollywood. Decided this would be a good property to bring to Hollywood. So she said, "Yep, we're doing this." They told me about it. The day after they told me about it, I saw the very first ad for the first Shrek movie and said, "There's all my
Right.
ideas." So I
Yeah.
called them up and said, "Well, someone beat us to it, so I'm going to withdraw the proposal because it looks like the Shrek movie is doing the thing where all the fairy tale characters get together at once." Um, and Jeanette Kahn and Shelley got on the phone with me and said, "You're an idiot. We're still doing it. Is what you're doing going to be like the Shrek movie?" And I go, "Well, probably not." Goes, "Yeah."
Right. Is this
So
so? Well, what's interesting though is that, I mean, you can see the inspiration in. I forget the names of the shows or the movies because I honestly, I didn't really think they were that great. But you can see those elements in a few different shows and films of the time. But
sure,
what you were doing was absolutely like on a whole different level. And like you were saying, it wasn't some like teeny bopper sort of, silly story. It was actually something with real gravity and weight. Is this, so you had used, and I've seen you use the term before. So does Fables kind of sum up your idea of what mythic fiction is, or am I kind of misunderstanding what your
I
idea
think
of
it
fiction?
certainly fits well within the idea of myth. I think mythic fiction is a bigger idea than
Yeah.
just fable. It involves mythology and adventure. I think Tolkien would fit into mythic fiction, but maybe Game of Thrones wouldn't. It's kind of a nebulous. It's got to have a sense of something bigger out there that's important, but maybe unseen. Um, Fables sums up, well, a lot of it was practical. Is like what is good about fairy tales? Well, one of the first things I decided is they're mean. They're just they're not pretty. They're not happy. Uh, all the Baudelaires ones, tried to make them pretty
Right.
and happy,
Right.
but it never quite took. There's always some realization that the best ones were always the meanest ones, um, but with a struggle of people trying to be good and decent to each other within that. Uh, you know, uh, Good people in a really, really terrible world. Um, uh, I think that was part of it. There was a lot of Zelazny in it. I love
Mm-hmm.
Roger Zelazny because he
Sure.
writes stories about fantastic
Yeah.
environments with practical people in them. None of his heroes are, ooh, we're so magical and we're so wondrous. It's like, no, they're problem solving people trying to get their life sorted out and their work
Yeah.
done
Yeah.
within these wonderful settings. And I think Fables is very much, it's got some Zelazny DNA in
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just in the idea of these fantastical kind of elements that are basically uprooted and planted in the modern day, there's going to be some sort of conflict between the two of them, and a lot of things to be kind of solved by that.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so, what was your attempt? I actually read a little bit about Fabletown and Beyond.
yeah.
And I've read really good reviews of it. And I feel a little bad now because I can't remember the source of this, but I read, and maybe I'll later put it as a credit in the description of the interview. Um, what I read of it was Fabletown and Beyond is nothing like any other convention that's going on right now, but it's what convention should be. Can you tell
Yes.
me a little bit about what your intent with Fabletown and Beyond was?
Uh, it was not mysterious. My intent was, all right, let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
While I was an MP, like every other MP and every other cop in existence, from time to time we would do these things. Like we had to escort the American Express bank money to its deposit every night. Well, of course, we would be sitting in our cars while they do their stuff, planning. Now, if we were going to knock over this, here's how I would do it. Every cop in the world plans how they would do a heist because most of the people they deal with are stupid and haven't worked it out. Fabletown and Beyond reflected that in that I've been in this business, 40 years now, but all through those years, I did many, many conventions. And in all those conventions, there is this is wonderful, and this, what are they doing? This was badly thought. This whole list of how they're doing this wrong and how I would do it if I did it. And finally just decide, what the hell? Let's see if I'm a complete dick, bright, or if any of these ideas I have are true. You can do it,
yeah.
So I decided to host with lots of help a small convention where the operating rules is everything I think a convention should be and none of the things I think conventions shouldn't be. I got lost in that sentence. But
I think I see I understand your intent.
But people helping wanted to come up with these. I go, nope, we're doing it my way, because this is probably my one time, and it probably will be, where it's just like put up or shut up. So it was going to be a small convention. We planned for 300 people. We ended up with 307. So really, I should have thrown 7 of those bums out on the street. But we had 300 people show up for it. But it was, I did a lot of conventions where the convention didn't have control of a bar. And all these bars are unready for the kind of drinking that convention people do, especially Sunday night. I was at a science fiction convention Sunday night. Every person that was at that convention was in the bar, and they were overwhelmed. They had one waitress on duty that had to be both waitress and bartender, and 3 managers just watching her being run ragged. And so I asked him, like, why didn't you have enough people here? He goes, it's Sunday night and people don't go to the bar after the convention's done. They go home or they go out to important dinners and stuff. And I go, no, science fiction comic people, they drink. They stay in the hotel and drink.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing, is like, make sure I control. And many times where the bar closes early, or they didn't have enough booze, or they just didn't plan well enough, or they didn't like these people, and they're just like, yeah, you guys. So we had a host hotel and negotiated a really good contract with them. One of which is that this one old restaurant that they weren't using anymore, we opened that up as our own private bar during this thing. And they agreed, they had to supply the booze and the bartenders. There was, we couldn't get our own liquor license, but we had a contract that, like, there was going to be this much, and you're going to have a way to get booze right away if you run out. And we're going to stay open until 2 every night. And it was it was an Elizabethan themed restaurant that had gone under. So it really fit in with the character, Fabletown and Beyond.
Yeah. And it's small. I mean, if you only have 300 people, I would imagine that, you go to conventions these days, and they're like, if you go to the Jacob Javits Center or something, it's insane. But I would imagine you kind of get to feel kind of like a family if it's a 2 or 3 day convention.
Oh, yeah. The other thing I wish comic conventions would do is science fiction book conventions have opening ceremonies and closing. Yeah. They sort of thank people for showing up at the beginning, and thank them and send them on their way at the end.
Right.
And comic conventions don't do it. Comic conventions started as huckster shows, where the only reason you did it was to get guys together with old comics to sell them to each other and to people that show up.
Right.
Book conventions, science fiction book conventions, started off as literature shows where they didn't even have huckster rooms. They didn't have a sales floor at all. They got together and talked about books they like with each other.
Well, that's one of the things I've always enjoyed.
And the two sort of have been growing together. So we picked the best of both. We did opening ceremonies. We had a guest of honor. We our programming, every guest got a sheet that basically told them, show up in time for your program. People paid money for this. Don't be I hated comics conventions where a guy will show up finally in the middle of the panel he was supposed to be on, clearly didn't care about being there, still finishing his lunch or whatever. And I just hated that. I hated it with a passion. So the programming will be about stuff, and learn your stuff. We had a few problems where people didn't quite get the word on why that was important right away.
Right.
But we had fun programming. We had one room that was just called the talk show room, and every panel was set up like a TV talk show, where someone like Matt Sturgis had the Welcome Matt show.
Right.
And we even had the theater that we were using for our couches and stuff actually had these old fake TV cameras for some production. So we had those set up, and we had a fern and anyway, everything. We had guests scheduled so that at all times in the bar, there's at least one guest that will be there for an hour to where you can talk to on a small basis. And then we rotated that. All these things that, we had a pool party that turned out to be a blast. They let us stay, it closes at 11. They let us stay till 1. Just every possible thing. But everything worked out meticulously. Then on Sunday, I finally began to enjoy myself because it's just like.
Well, probably up until then, you're trying to make sure everything's going the right way.
Yeah.
And then finally, on the last day, maybe you can cut loose a little
maybe
bit.
Maybe it'll turn out okay. We had good people.
Yeah.
We had good food service.
Yeah.
And everything was clear. There was no doubt in any, like the hotel or the bar or the convention center. Everything was meticulously said. This is our responsibility. This is yours. You have to have all of that worked out in advance, and it turned out great. We got not one complaint from the customers, and not one complaint from the guests. And I can't even imagine a comics show where the invited guests aren't grumbling about something.
Right.
Everyone liked it, and I thought that if I quit now, I'll never be anything but 100% successful.
Right. So you haven't done one since then? Was it just the one?
No, it was too much work. It was a year and a half.
I can imagine. Yeah.
People that do conventions well, and there are quite a few, that's their life.
Right.
And I couldn't take another year and a half off of, my work to do it again. I was hoping, because it was Fabletown and Beyond, like someone else would pick it up and say, the next one is Mouse Guard and Beyond, or something like that.
Oh, that's cool. That would be cool.
They almost did, but
you could kind of pass the torch every year in a different.
Right. Yeah. I was hoping they would.
That'd be great.
Anyway. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm taking you way over the time that I initially told you.
You're a heinous host.
I know I'm horrible. I'm not controlling my guest. I'm allowing my guest to steamroller over me. But it's just so awesome to hear all this stuff. Is there something you've got coming up real big that you're super excited about, or something maybe in the back of your head that you can share with us?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I just sent off an email about a certain series of connected projects, basically saying, I want to talk about this. We've been sitting on this for more than a year. Oh, wait. Maybe she answered me. Hold on.
Oh.
Maybe I can't talk about it.
My goodness, everyone. We may have breaking news that we cannot share with you at all, but let it be known that it was not shared here first.
Okay. Boy, I can't even paraphrase this well without giving stuff away.
Okay.
Apparently something, we're going to be talking about it real soon. So keep that. In the meantime, I've been working on this, and all sorts of stuff is going to come out at about once. In the meantime, I have a couple of prose novels that I'm
Nice.
dipping my toe into the self-publishing game. So if you would go to, the listeners would go to Amazon.com. There are two novels. One is Just Another Ranker, and it's about a young man who, from our world, that goes to a fantasy world, and full of elves and giants and things like that. Only it doesn't quite work out on the John Carter template. He goes there and joins a modern rifle company, and it's the adventures of a mercenary company of modern combat men in a fantasy world. And that's available on Amazon, like either Kindle or you can get a printed book. And there's another novel, Hammer of the Gods, which is about a mercenary who accidentally comes into possession of Thor's hammer. And
that's right.
Then in our time, in modern days, and all the people and all the powers of the open and the hidden world are after that thing, and he's in the between a rock and a hard place. And I would appreciate it if you would consider, if you like prose stuff, pick those up. What else is coming up soon? I don't think anything I can mention yet.
Oh my goodness, you just have me on the edge of my seat, and the chat is on the edge of their seat as well. But well, tell you what, I can put
something that's going to come out in September. That's what I'm going to give away.
Okay, something that's going to, so you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
Something in September from Bill Willingham. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get those links from him after the show and put them in the comment section below so that all of you can go through and grab that stuff.
I'll read this more thoroughly. Maybe, maybe I will be able to give something more than what I've just said. But some big stuff. I hope there'll be big things.
Yeah, I'm sure from you, without a doubt, it will be. And I'm definitely looking forward to all of it. Bill, I want to say thank you very much. And I need to also apologize to you, and I want to make clear to everybody in the audience. I had told Bill originally, it's an hour. And he has kindly gone on for at least an hour and 45 or an hour.
Matthew, I always talk too much.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I apologize. I hope that I haven't kept you from creating. There were a zillion other things that I actually wanted to talk about, but I fear that we'll be here all night if we keep going on. And I do.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Yes.
Let's schedule another one when I can actually talk about these things, and then you can get to those.
I'd love that. Oh,
all
yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I would love to do that. So I want to say thank you very much to Bill Willingham, who was very kind to come on. He came out of nowhere. I want to remind everybody and tell everybody, I basically look at my bookshelf. I think about the people and the creators that I've seen before and people that I really love talking to. And I just cold email them. And Bill's like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. It was very nice of him to do so. If you like what you saw and you want to maybe support me, please like and subscribe the channel, and you'll get to see, it sounds like Bill's going to come back maybe in, I'm guessing, September or so to talk about this new project.
Maybe. Yeah, it depends on when we officially announce that these things exist.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, Bill, thank you so much. I'm going to take us out now. I appreciate your time. To you viewers listening and watching at home, thank you very much. We will see you again soon. And thank you so much, Bill.
You bet. I'm glad to do it.